Have you ever felt unheard or perhaps even powerless in your relationships and interactions? How can past experiences of abuse or trauma contribute to those feelings? And can assertive language and behavior empower you to advocate for your rights and needs? If so, what strategies can we adopt to become more assertive and create healthier connections? Are you ready to reclaim your voice and set boundaries that honor your worth and dignity? Join me after the intro for a conversation with a very special friend with whom we will answer this and many more questions. So grab a cup of coffee, settle in, and let's start. Hi, I'm Rossana D, and this is Forgive and Thrive, a podcast where we explore what thriving in life means and how we can achieve it, irrespective of our past, current condition, and expectations that those around us or society in general may have. Let's go. Welcome to the Forgive and Thrive show. We have often talked about the impact of abusive relationships on our sense of self-worth. They leave deep scars that are often invisible. They erode our confidence, distort our perception, and chip away our ability to assert ourselves, even in the simplest of interactions. But reclaiming our voices, our power, and our dignity is possible. So today we explore the transformative power of assertive communication for survivors of abuse. We want to shine a light on the intricate ways in which abusive relationships can shape our ability to communicate and set boundaries, and uncover practical strategies to reclaim our voices and rewrite our narratives. And we dive into this fascinating topic in a conversation with our guest, Comfort Woods. Comfort is a personal empowerment coach. After overcoming years of emotional abuse and finding the strength to retake control of her own life, she became dedicated to sharing the valuable lessons and insights she picked up along her journey of transformation. Her mission is to provide a supportive space for women who have suffered emotional abuse, the skills and mindset to assert themselves with confidence and become their own champion, reclaim their power, and rewrite their own narratives. Hi, Comfort. Welcome to the Forgive and Try show. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Fantastic. I'm really looking forward to this conversation because sometimes when we have people that have suffered and endured an abuse, we don't know. And they have perhaps behaviors, they communicate in a way that for those who didn't have or had been lucky enough not to endure an abuse, become difficult to understand, right? So I'm really excited to discover and to talk with you about this. But before we go into the main topic, I would like to start with you. And I only mention a few things about your bio. But perhaps if you can start telling about yourself and your journey of discovering perhaps how important being assertive and communicate properly can be, that would be great. Thank you.
Absolutely. So my journey actually begins a long, long time ago. It starts in childhood, actually. I grew up in a very isolated community with only a handful of other children to interact with. We were wild and very unsupervised. And what I didn't know at the time was that a lot of the children in my neighborhood had been abused and were at the time currently being abused at home. And so the way they interacted with me was much the same. I was at the bottom of the pecking order. I was the lowest in status of the group. And so I was often physically and emotionally bullied every single day. And because it was such an isolated community, I couldn't just walk away from them and play with other children. They were the only children that I had. So I developed these habits of thoughts and behavior where I was fixated on not rocking the boat. I was fixated on being as easygoing as possible, tiptoeing around the other children, hoping that they won't start treating me badly again. And every day, it didn't matter what I did, I was mistreated every day. So the way that those patterns of thinking and behaving manifested in my adult life was that I found myself in situations that were not of my choosing, because I took it upon myself to be so easygoing and tiptoe around everyone else's feelings and become hyper aware of how everyone else was doing, that I lost myself. I lost the ability to see what I needed and what I wanted. So I found myself in situations as an adult where I wouldn't speak up for myself. I didn't have any boundaries, and I would bend to the whims of whoever was in front of me and whoever yelled the loudest. So that manifested really hard in my personal relationships. And when I got married, I had a lot of bad habits. I would engage in passive aggressive behavior because I was afraid to be assertive. I was afraid to speak my needs clearly and concisely. And I didn't have that equilibrium to communicate clearly without getting angry or scared. And so my life went on like that for a number of years until finally there was an incident. You see, my husband at the time was an alcoholic, and my way of coping with that was extremely enabling and codependent. And so it all came to a head one night when he was particularly angry, and I had made hundreds of excuses for his anger over the years, but it was the first time that I was ever afraid of him. It got to the point where in that moment, I was afraid that he was going to physically hurt me. So I ran to my mother's house and stayed with her for a few weeks. It was my absolute rock bottom moment. And I was afraid. I was feeling hopeless. I had made every excuse and walked on all the eggshells to make this marriage work, and was quietly waiting for something to change. And it hadn't. It had only gotten worse. And so, in a moment of absolute desperation and brokenness, my mother spoke to me, and she said, I remember when you were young and you were just this little ball of sunshine who managed to turn things around every day. Again, I had to, because it was a survival tactic. And she said, it kills me to see you like this, because this isn't who you are. And those words stuck with me. So one morning I got up off the couch and went to the bathroom to splash water on my face to wipe away the tears. And I looked in the mirror and I saw that child that she was talking about. And I had a moment of connection with past me, the one who had been mistreated all those years, the one who fantasized about someday being strong, someday being confident, someday not letting people treat me like that anymore. And I realized that this was it. I was the adult. And if I didn't start fighting for the life that I want and the relationships that I want, then nothing was ever going to change. And something just shifted that day. And that was when the transformation began. So I moved 1,000 miles away and separated from my husband. I went back to school, which I had been putting off because he wanted to live somewhere else. He wanted to do something else, and I just went along with it. So I finally said no more of that. And I went back to school and I got a new job and started making choices for my own life for the very first time. So that was the beginning of the transformation. And then through a very long journey beyond that, and this was something I hadn't counted on, I was ready to let go of that relationship entirely. But as soon as I made a change, he finally made a change. It was an ultimatum, basically. I said, I can't go this way with you anymore if this is how it's going to be. If you're going to keep drinking, I don't feel safe with you. And it was the first boundary that I really set and stuck to. And lo and behold, he actually quit drinking. And he went to therapy. And he quit his dead-end job and started looking at his own life. And over time, with a lot of trial and error, I learned to set boundaries and communicate with confidence and be assertive, and essentially taught him how to treat me right, for real. And now, fast forward another however many years it's been since that day, and now I have a master's degree in education. I have a coaching business, and he is about 10 years sober and absolutely thriving. And our relationship is thriving. And none of that would have been possible without my finally standing up and saying no more.
Mhm.
So that's where I'm coming from with this. And I know there are so many women out there who are facing these same challenges, who have these same patterns of thoughts and behavior that maybe kept them safe in the heat of the moment, but are essentially holding them back from having the life that they really want.
It's a beautiful story, and it's a story not of just one person recovery and thriving, but actually two, right? Fantastic story to start with. There are so many things that I can completely relate to. I burn out at work, and it was again because I didn't have boundaries. I discovered what boundaries are probably 5 years ago when I didn't have any. And I can completely relate to that sense of I don't know what boundaries are. So do whatever you want with me, right? So can we start saying what being assertive really means? Because sometimes out of trauma, out of abuse, perhaps you mentioned we assume behaviors or styles of communication where we try to be assertive, but in reality, we are passive or we are aggressive or passive aggressive.
Mm-hmm.
Can we define what an assertive communication style really is and how it presents itself? And perhaps, I don't know, give some example.
Absolutely. So, assertive communication is where you can clearly state your needs and your boundaries in a way that is neither passive nor aggressive. Essentially, that is what it is. And when you are abused, your ability to find that midpoint goes away. And it becomes extremely difficult to reorient yourself and find how to communicate in a way that is free of judgment, free of anger, but still in defense of yourself and your needs and still holding true to your own values. So in my case, I was made to believe that I was too sensitive, too needy, too angry. And being told these things over and over again, also being told that I was too passive and too much of a doormat. Being told these things about myself over and over again, I internalized those beliefs. And it got to the point where every time there was a situation where I needed to set a boundary or communicate assertively, I didn't know how. I would either let things slide way too much, or it would get to the point where I would finally get angry and explode in a rage, which was also not helpful. And that would only confirm my beliefs about having anger problems. Or, like you said, engage in passive aggressive behavior. So I would have a need or a boundary or something, and this is something a lot of people do, is you have a need or a boundary or something's bothering you or something needs to change. And instead of just saying it, you hint at it. Because maybe in the past, saying your needs straightforward was not safe and it would set your abuser off and put them into a rage or an outburst of some kind. So instead, you tiptoe around the subject and you make little hints and little jabs and whatever you can to kind of get the message across, but not really. And anyone who's been on the receiving end of passive aggressive behavior, it is toxic. And it only lowers your self-esteem because you know on some level that it is toxic and you want to stop. But those habits are really, really hard to break. They really are. So developing assertive communication not only helps you, it also helps the people you're speaking to because it relieves them of that guesswork. And when you're around people who are safe, then assertive communication can be easier and a lot more effective and well received. It says a lot about a person who cannot handle assertive communication.
Mm. What would you say are some of the most common challenges for survivors that they need to face when they are trying to learn how to be assertive?
Well, for starters, you have to believe in your right to being treated well. It really comes down to mindset, because when you're abused, your mindset tells you that your needs are not valid, that your life isn't worth it, that you don't have any value of your own, and that how you present to others is everything. And when you're in a survival state, you're so fixated on managing the emotions of others that you forget your own. And if you've been gaslighted into thinking that stating any needs of your own is inherently selfish, then there's always going to be this visceral reaction whenever you do stand up for yourself. And yeah, being on the receiving end of passive aggression, it provides a lot of uncertainty because the person is not clearly and directly communicating with you. And uncertainty is dangerous. If you're in a survivor situation, then you know how that feels to not have that certainty, not have that control over the situation. And it is absolutely terrifying. And so people tend to go into fix-it mode, where they want to jump in to an issue that is not theirs and make those feelings go away for the other person, because you're trained to believe that other people's emotions are dangerous. So you have to put a stop to it. And it can be really, really challenging to hold back and say, you know what? This isn't mine. I understand that you're feeling how you're feeling, but this is not mine to carry, and I need to step away and put it down. That is one of the biggest challenges right there that people face. And getting over those limiting beliefs that say, I am not worth fighting for. And that was one of the biggest things that I came to in my own journey, was having that moment of connecting with that inner child. It's so easy to fight for others, someone you care about, someone who's struggling. It's way too easy to make excuses for their behavior. It's way too easy to empathize with what they're feeling to the point where you lose yourself. It is way too easy to get lost in someone else's journey. So that's why my method is called the inner child method, because the idea is that you take that strength that you have for others and you turn it towards your own inner child, the one who first developed those coping mechanisms, the one who is still in there and needs you to take care of her. Because that's what it came to for me, was no one else is going to save her. So with my method, you get in touch with your own inner child and you communicate with that inner child the same way that you would communicate with a friend or loved one. Because that makes it a lot easier to turn that empathy inward for once and be able to fight for your own needs. It's the mindset that is probably the biggest challenge. From there, anything is possible with a little help.
Thank you very much for stressing that out. Again, I can completely resonate with that. Justifying every single behavior of other people, even when it was clearly unacceptable. I think it's pretty much standard for everybody who has gone through abuse. And waking up and recognize that that, in fact, is not acceptable. It's very hard. It's very hard, as you said, to recognize that we have that pattern and that we have to change first and foremost.
And also, we have needs too. You know, we are people who deserve to take up space just as much as anyone else on this planet. We are here and we matter. And we matter to the people around us. Almost everyone I know who's been through an abuse situation has had at least one person looking at them and just wishing they would do something, which can be part of what makes you get isolated. What makes you isolate yourself is that shame. Because if you're in an abusive situation and you're seeing the way your friends and your family are looking at you, there can be a lot of shame that comes up from that. So you find yourself lying to them and pretending that everything's great when it isn't. But the fact is, those are signs that we are putting up with things that we shouldn't be. And it can be really painful to confront that shame, but it's absolutely critically important. And so connecting with your inner child and fighting for her the way you would fight for a friend or a loved one it lights a fire in you and makes it possible to draw those boundaries and assert yourself.
It's interesting that this can happen. There is a turning point, right, in the relationship that we have with everything that is happening around us. There is a pre-stage where we basically accept everything, and then something has to happen, like in your case. And until we get to that point, I think it's very difficult to say, well, I need to take care of my child. Perhaps we don't see it, right? So what would you say are some red flags that are obvious that we can perhaps look at in behaviors, our behavior, the other person behavior, that can point to some issues in terms of communication, in terms of boundaries that perhaps are not there or are not that clear, that we still have to start working basically on ourselves and our inner child?
Yes. So the first sign I'm thinking of is if you find yourself unable to make a decision without thinking of the other person and what they might say and what they might do. And if this generates anxiety for you because you don't want to get in trouble with that person for making the wrong decision, that is a major red flag. I existed in that space for years, and it is not fun. It is very uncomfortable. If you say something in a group with that person present and you see the way they look at you and you find yourself afraid of what they might say or do when you're alone again, that's a red flag. Those are the big ones that come to mind. Basically, if you find yourself daydreaming about fixing all of their problems and constantly trying to work out what they're thinking and what they're feeling and what they need to fix their life, and you find yourself spending the majority of your time thinking about them and not you, that is a red flag. If deep down there's a part of you that wants to do something, that wants to make some sort of change, whether it's move to a new city, start a new job, pick up a new hobby, engage in a different kind of relationship, whatever it is, and there's a part of you that is afraid of the change and the unknown, or afraid of potentially damaging your relationship because of what they might say or do that might hurt you, that's a red flag. Those are all red flags that can be indicative that something is wrong and something needs to change.
It makes me think about the word freedom. You have the freedom to take decisions and do what feels right for you. And yeah.
I'd say you take your freedom back because it's a big world out there. And unless someone is physically restraining you or financially restraining you, it can get really bad, right? But if it's a matter of it hasn't gotten to that point yet, you have the freedom to take your power back. And so those little ways of thinking of it, if you're thinking, I want this person to give me my freedom, they still have the power. And you're still giving them that power. I agree with what you're saying, freedom. If you're feeling like you are not free, then that's a red flag. Because I've been on the other end of it now for many years, and I can tell you freedom is absolutely possible. You should be able to make a decision on your own and tell the person it without feeling fear or anxiety, because you are telling them, this is what's happening, this is how it is, I'm making a decision. You're informing them. And that's something that feels so foreign when you're in an abusive situation or freshly out of one and haven't changed your mindset yet. But that is how it should be. You should be able to make decisions on your own without worrying about repercussions from anyone else.
Comfort, there is one aspect that I found very difficult to go with, and that was navigating triggers. Especially when you are in the transition phase, let's say, after that pivotal moment. It can be very challenging if you found yourself in a situation that in the past triggered you, and then you may just go back in the same dynamic. How do we deal with triggers?
Exactly. And that is a very real fear and a very valid one to have. That was my biggest fear in my transition, was that, we were separated. I was 1,000 miles away and he was doing the right things. But my biggest fear was that he was going to do just enough to get me back. And then it would all go right back to the way it was. And so I believe that in that period of transition, when we're finally ready to take it seriously and step up and set some serious boundaries, we might go overboard and overcompensate with our boundaries a little bit. And I think that's just part of the process. And it can be pretty jarring for the people around us when suddenly we become very rigid and very unmoving, but it's necessary. And it takes a while to find that equilibrium. And as for triggers, discovering your triggers is really difficult, because the way to do it oftentimes is to trip them. And being able to quickly get yourself out of the triggered state is paramount. So being able to escape the situation temporarily and calm down your nervous system through breathing, through exercise, through meditation, mindfulness, even splashing cold water on your face to activate the vagus nerve. There's all sorts of ways to calm your system down when you're in a triggered state. And then after you are in a calmer state, you're able to reflect on what happened and what hit your trigger and what your trigger is. And this is way easier said than done. And it's really important to have someone to guide you through it, because doing it on your own, like you said, it's an old dynamic, and those neural pathways are in there and they are extremely difficult to change. So having someone who's been through it, who can help you analyze the situation and see things more clearly from a little bit of distance, from not in the middle of it, is really, really important. And so as you move through this journey, you learn to calm yourself quicker. You learn to catch and analyze your triggers quicker, to the point where eventually you can see them coming before you hit them. And that's what happened with me, is that I would get into these screaming matches with my husband, and then I'd have to walk away, which is something I hadn't done before. I would often shut down or cave or explode or something. But when I was finally ready to make a change, I became rigid and I said, okay, you know what? No, I am going to walk away if it escalates. And so I started doing that. And yes, it was terrifying. And I was in a very heightened state each time that would happen. But it would take gradually less and less time to be able to calm down and analyze the situation. And it wasn't just me either, because in this state, my husband was used to our old dynamics as well. And he was used to getting his way and having me, submit. And so it was a lot for him too. But eventually he would start to calm down finally too, and turn around and say, you know what, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have yelled. And, at first it would be maybe a day or two for him to calm down. And then after that, later on, it would be several hours. And then eventually it would be 10 minutes, until finally it got to the point where I wouldn't even need to leave. I would be on my way out the door and he'd say, wait, I'm so sorry. I shouldn't behave this way. And then it got to the point where there was no more yelling. There was no more anger or outbursts, because I held those boundaries. And it was extremely difficult, but gradually we got to the point where we could have a productive conversation without being triggered.
Yeah, that learning curve, I think, is very challenging, and you're right. I mean, it's not just learning on our side. There is someone else that is used to know the oldest. So, do you have practical tips or exercises that we can use to learn how to be more assertive?
Yeah, absolutely. So I like to guide my clients through a visualization exercise where you connect with that inner child and you come up with things that they say to you in that vulnerable, triggered state and you formulate your own compassion. Because if you wouldn't say it to a child, do not say it to yourself. And so having that visualization. So for example, if you close your eyes and you imagine yourself in a vulnerable, much younger state, and you ask yourself, okay, how old is this version of me? What is this version of me wearing? What struggles are they going through? And whatever it is you're feeling, imagine that that is the child going through this. It's a lot easier to have compassion when it's someone else, especially yourself, your past self. And so your past self might say something along the lines of, I'm just worthless. I brought this on myself. I don't have what it takes. I can't. And so yelling at this child and shaming them for feeling these feelings and making these mistakes is not helpful. You'd never do that to a child. And so you get to be the adult that you needed, that you still need, and you become that person for yourself. And then you formulate your own responses and your affirmations that are catered to you, that are personal. Affirmations like, your needs do matter. And it's okay that you're struggling with this. It is genuinely difficult. And no, they should not be treating you this way. And it takes practice. It takes a lot of practice. But developing that mindset, it really, really helps. And it gets to the point where when you're in a situation, even in the heat of the moment, you can imagine your inner child watching the situation and seeing what you do as an adult. And you get to become that strong person that they needed, their defender. That's one of the biggest exercises that I work with my clients on. The mindset is really the foundation for everything else. And beyond that, you can get into scripting and role playing and, how much to explain, because people tend to undermine themselves by over explaining. And going into the dynamics of, okay, what to do when the other person is triggered, because we're not dealing with expert communicators out there in the real world. We're dealing with people who are just as flawed as we are. And so having that compassion for their inner child as well. And so having that visualization, to this day, every time I find myself in a tough spot where I'm feeling less than my best, I can make that separation and have an inner dialogue with that triggered childlike state as the adult and say, you know what, I understand you're hurting. I understand you're in pain and I understand you're scared, but don't worry. We got this.
There is a lot of compassion as well, right? You have compassion for your inner child, but perhaps even for the other party. And you allow some space to the other person to amend whatever they did to you. That allows the other person to come back to you in a safe manner, if they have the ability and the understanding.
Well, first, I would give myself space to feel all the feelings before communicating with anyone else, because sometimes you just need to let yourself feel the feelings. And if you react with those feelings and start projecting them outward, you might cause a lot more damage than you mean to. So take the time to calm down. Taking the time to calm yourself is really important. And then said, hey, this happened. I'm feeling a lot of feelings about it. So being able to communicate, this is what I'm feeling, without putting it on the other parties to fix it for you. And when you develop that compassion for your own inner child and have that self-acceptance and forgiveness for your own flaws and your own struggles, it becomes easier to recognize when someone else's inner child is acting up. So, for example, if you're at a grocery store with a child and they want candy for breakfast and you say no, that child is going to react emotionally. And, they are entitled to their feelings, but you're going to hold to your boundaries about it and say, no, I understand you're feeling how you're feeling, but this is how it is. And so that's the essence of assertive communication. You don't take on their feelings and you don't try to shut them down and you don't try to fix them or give in, because if you give in, you're reinforcing the behavior. So instead, you have that space and you say to them, I understand this is how you're feeling, but that doesn't change what's happening. This is for the best. And it's not the same thing as hoping that someone else will change. Because when you're in an abusive situation, this might sound really familiar of saying, oh, I'm just going to teach them and I'm going to, be compassionate for them because obviously they're struggling so much. I can see that. So I'm just going to make excuses and I'm going to give in and I'm going to hold space for them when I shouldn't because it's not mine. Knowing your own limits is really important. And a lot of times what people in abusive situations do is they'll make too much room for someone else's feelings and not enough room for their own. And so it's not the same thing. And it's tricky to find the difference and find that equilibrium between being passive and being aggressive to find assertive communication. Much easier with a guide and someone to hold your hand to help you out with this. It's a tough journey, but it's absolutely worth doing because if you are able to communicate assertively and able to hold space for yourself and for someone else at the same time and hold your boundaries, then you can manifest a life that is beyond your wildest imagination. It can be so much better than it has been.
There is something that came to my mind listening to you, and that's self-awareness. What role does self-awareness play in distinguishing between being assertive or having an assertive communication and becoming aggressive or passive-aggressive?
Oh, self-awareness is huge because when you're in a reactive state, you're not necessarily aware of how you're feeling. You're more just kind of reacting to the situation without thinking, which makes sense because get a little nerdy here, but like when you're in an elevated state emotionally, your prefrontal cortex shuts down and your ability to think clearly and make sound decisions goes away. You become in survival mode. And so it's really important to be able to check in with your body. It starts with your body because emotions are felt throughout the entire body. So to be able to take the time, and maybe this is after the situation is, after you've removed yourself from the situation and are in that calming down state, where you're trying to bring yourself back to your equilibrium, back to homeostasis, but becoming aware of how your body feels when certain ideas and emotions come up. And this is a practice you can do when you're not in the middle of a conflict. It's probably better when you're not in the middle of a conflict, but to just take the time to think about specific situations and check in with yourself, see how your temperature is and your breathing and your posture. Are you grinding your jaw? Do you have goosebumps? Are you breaking into a cold sweat? Like, what is happening to your body when you think about certain situations? And that's the beginning of self-awareness. And it's extremely important because when you become really good at assertive communication, you can feel those feelings come up in your body, but you can breathe your way through them so they don't take over and control you.
Absolutely beautiful. And from our inner child to a real child, how can we teach the children in our lives to be more assertive and to learn some of these skills and be compassionate and start to have boundaries that are not just, oh, I want the cookie, like you said, in the shop, but they are building up that good level of communication to say, this is not good for me. I know that children need a little bit more time perhaps to develop that kind of language, but how can we take them in a journey where they start to understand these kind of things?
I actually have a lot of experience working with children as an educator. So that's a great question. And yeah, that is a big part of growing up. And I've seen a lot of children struggle with this because they're, that part of their brain that controls decision making and emotional regulation and impulse control isn't there yet. So it can be extremely difficult. So you have to literally give them the language. If someone's doing something that they don't want to tolerate, if another kid is pushing them or playing with them in a way that they don't like, you have to teach them to say the words, no, thank you. I don't like that. Please don't. And you have to respect a child's boundaries when it comes to their own body and their own safety. A lot of times children will be told, you have to give that uncle a hug, or you have to, let this aunt kiss you, or whatever it is, and let them have their bodily autonomy. If they don't feel comfortable being touched or moved around, do what you can to, within the bounds of keeping them safe, obviously. If they want to run out into traffic, don't let them. But a lot of it too comes down to a matter of trust. If you are a safe adult and they know that you have their best interest at heart, they might react and they might have whatever feelings in the moment, but ultimately they will come back to, okay, this is for my own good and I trust you. Because that's how it is as adults too. We need to hear honest feedback and reflection from people that we can trust. And a lot of times how we get into an abusive situation is we start to accept feedback from people that we shouldn't be accepting it from. So teaching children how to tell the difference between someone who really has their best interest at heart and someone who is controlling them.
Absolutely. I love that. At what age would you say they start to be receptive of this kind of conversation?
Oh, a lot younger than you'd think. I've seen children as young as 6 years old starting to develop and practice these communication skills. And the earlier you start, the more fluent they become quicker, and it becomes easier for them to navigate difficult situations as they, say, hit puberty and start having a lot more emotions than they're used to in different ways. So it's never too early to start. And holding space for them to have their emotions is really a big one too. I forgot to mention that, but if a child is reacting to a boundary of yours, let them have their reaction. They are entitled to their feelings about it. That doesn't mean you give in, but you don't minimize either. It's okay for a child to be angry that you won't give them ice cream for breakfast. They're entitled to their feelings. Now, it's not okay for them to break things or hurt anyone, but if you find ways for them to channel their anger in a way that is not damaging, then let them have their feelings and process on their own. A lot of times people are uncomfortable with strong emotions from others, especially if you have been victim of other people's emotions. It can be really tempting to want to shut it down or fix it. And so either holding space yourself or stepping away if you can't. And knowing the difference, knowing when to step away and when to hold space is really important, whether it's a child or an adult.
Yeah, I can definitely see this being a bit of a challenge for me. So thank you for reminding us that it's okay and we need to practice. So what would be your final advice for someone that has been in an abusive situation for many years, so they know the dynamics of that abuse, but they are close to that turning point on how to start their journey to become more assertive and to build up that boundaries around them?
I would say that it has to start with you. Waiting for the other person to make a change is not going to work. Trust me, I tried. It has to come from you. And you never know what kind of change you could set in motion by taking the first step. The first step is often the hardest. And if you can find a guide to help you through that journey, someone to offer you reflection, someone to celebrate the small wins with you, someone to tell you you're not crazy, that can be huge. It's absolutely worth doing. And even if you have escaped an abusive situation and you're out of it, the patterns of thinking and behaving that you've developed to survive in that situation, if you're not careful, those could be the same patterns that pull you right into another abusive situation. So it's really, really important to take the time to analyze your own patterns and develop a mindset and a way of communicating that will keep you in a place of empowerment in your life. Because if you can do that, you can manifest any kind of life you want. And you can have the relationships that you've always wanted. You can be the person that you always hoped you would become. It is absolutely possible. So stay strong.
Beautiful, absolutely. And from that moment of empowerment, or the thriving stage, as I love to call it, how important is to release or accept what happened to us as something that we cannot change? Unfortunately, it belongs to the past, but perhaps it's time to move forward. And for me, these two aspects together, the acceptance and the permission to say, okay, I'm moving away from that past, is what is encapsulated basically in the message of forgiveness. What do you think about forgiveness? And is there a role for that in starting in that journey of becoming more assertive?
Absolutely. You have to be able to forgive yourself for getting into that situation in the first place. And oftentimes it starts out slow and it's insidious and it's not something that you necessarily see coming until you're in it. And it's really easy to look back and analyze every little situation and think about all the other things that you could have done differently. But essentially, if someone is abusing you, there is nothing else you could have said or done differently. All you can do is move forward. And it's not easy. It's not easy at all. And chances are you're going to stumble, you're going to fall, you're going to regress, you're going to get triggered. It's going to happen. And so offer yourself some grace and imagine that it's your inner child who is struggling with all of this, and forgive yourself. Forgive that child because they don't know any better. And that essentially is the state of mind that you get into when you're in that heightened state. Like I said, your prefrontal cortex shuts down. That's the part that doesn't exist when you're a kid. And so you need to hold your own hand, have some compassion, and say, it's okay. We are going to move forward from here. Much easier said than done. But you have permission to forgive yourself for what happened.
Absolutely. I totally agree. I totally love that. Thank you very much. Well, I would love to come back on you just before we conclude this lovely conversation. And is there anything in particular that you are working on or planning for that you would like to share with us?
Well, I have an 8-week program. It's one-on-one. It is high ticket, and it starts with one free transformation call. So to your listeners, I would like to offer a free transformation call where you can tell me your story. And if it makes sense to work together, I would love to help you on your transformation journey. But if it doesn't seem like the right fit, I can direct you towards resources that are more suited to your needs. And so please give me a call. You can book a call through my website.
Fantastic. So, well, we will put all the links, your website and your social media, in the description, in the show note for this episode, so everybody can find you. Comfort, very final question. If there was one take-home message that you would love everybody to remember from this conversation, what that would be?
I would say change is possible, and you are capable of so much more than you realize. And chances are part of you probably does realize it, but maybe you're afraid to take that first step. And I want you to know that taking the first step is the hardest part, but you don't have to do it alone. There are resources out there for you. I am a resource, and I would love to help you out if you want someone to talk to. But whatever it is in your situation, it is absolutely worth taking that first step. It's necessary. and it will open the door to a life that you have only dreamed of.
Absolutely. Well, as we conclude this episode, it's essential to reflect on the empowering journey we have embarked on together. Assertive communication is a vital tool for anybody, but in particular for survivors of abuse and trauma, for reclaiming agency and rebuilding self-esteem. And with this in mind, I want to leave you with an inspiring quote from Melody Beattie, who said, "Healing begins when we muster the courage to speak our truth, even if our voice shakes. In reclaiming our voices, we reclaim our power." Comfort, thank you very much for accepting our invitation and for sharing so much about yourself and what you do. I really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. I've really enjoyed it too.
Fantastic. Well, we would love to know what you think about this topic. How assertive are you? As you navigate your unique path towards assertive communication, know that it takes time and practice, but you are not alone, as we just heard. If you have challenges that you are facing right now, I'm sure that you will find this episode very inspiring and rich of very valuable tips. But if you need extra help, don't forget to check Comfort's website, her work, and to follow her on social media. You will find all the links in the description of today's episode. Hopefully not, but if you have been affected in any way by the topic we discussed today, as always, I invite you to seek professional help. Join me next time when we will continue exploring inspiring and challenging situations. Because remember, we are together in this journey. Thanks for watching. If you enjoy this content, subscribe to our channel and don't forget to hit the notification bell and like this video. See you in the next one.